So
we're going live right now.
Okay.
So we're waiting for Brock already. Brock
he
is already
predicted he would be 2 minutes late, so here we are. Great.
So the well, number one, welcome Brian to the Real Fridays on every Friday at 12:30. We both Jeremy, Brock, and I, sort of came together with this idea of having kind of a podcast. Hey, Brock, you're actually not your normal 1 or 2 minutes late, but you're a little bit late. So we're happy to have you join.
I clicked before the email was fully loaded, if that helps.
Brian, we came up with this idea of the podcast mainly to try to just have industry experts that have been in the business a long time in various domains talk about
when are they coming on?
Touche.
Well, yeah, touche. Very, very good point, Brian. You as being one of those industry experts,
Myself included.
Yeah, exactly. Just to talk about the weekly headlines, and there's just various points of interest that are really interesting to note, right? Because the industry is so dynamic right now that things really do change day by day or week by week. And then there's just broader industry trends that we'd like to talk about because the industry as a ship kind of moves and evolves, and the question is like, where is it heading? Like ultimately, where the biggest, most meaningful trends that are impacting both tech companies as well as lenders that enable these tech companies to achieve certain sort of consumer ends or financial ends or whatever the case may be. But yeah, no, this is welcome. I have to say, so I'm in Asheville, North Carolina, at the Omni Grove Park Inn, which is a beautiful, beautiful location. And today's like unofficial sponsor of this podcast is Wicked Weed Brewing, which they will be as surprised as we are that they are the sponsor of this podcast. So I just wanted to highlight Wicked Weed. It's an amazing brewing company here. It's one of the largest brewing companies here in Asheville. An amazing IPA, an amazing beer. So with that said, while you are in your dry 48 hours, Brian, tell us, you had said a detox of 48 hours. I actually Googled detox, and detox is not 48 hours.
It's more like a nap. I'm taking a nap. Just a little bit of a nap.
Yeah, it's an appropriate topic post an MBA annual convention where it seems like there's quite a bit of momentum around I'll meet you at this reception or I'll see you at this reception. Yeah. So I think you're not wrong, Rick, to pick a sponsor that kind of feeds into the post MBA conversation.
I just love the fact that everyone's going to Freedom's party at Maroon 5, and we're like, yeah, let's just go to some small Irish bar. Right. No one's in it, and the four of us will just hang out and have a few beers and just talk about the industry and industry trends. I mean,
we were the Marooned Four.
Yeah, that's right. So what were your MBA takeaways? Let's start with you, Brock. You've been both late and the least vocal so far. So what were your MBA takeaways?
Yeah, thanks, Rick. So when I received the email link at 12:30, it took me 1 minute to log into my other email account. You sent it to the wrong spot. Before the email was fully loaded, I got in. But all of that said, I went to 4 conferences in the last 3 weeks, and MBA was the biggest. I also went to Housing Wire, Acuma, and AIM. So MBA was kind of nice for me in the sense of that was a little more like that's one I've gone to before. That's one where I knew a lot of people. That's one that's bigger. That's one that is more of a known quantity to me personally. But I really enjoyed some of the other conferences too. I know I saw Brian out at Acuma 2 weeks ago, and that was a really well done conference for the credit union industry. But for MBA specifically, I didn't go to a lot of sessions, but we were able to go through and meet with a lot of potential strategic partners. My CEO, Audie, came in, and he hasn't been out to a lot of conferences this year. So it was good to have him out there. So we kind of did a blitz on talking, 10-minute meetings with a ton of different people. So that was fun. It was well attended from the vendor standpoint. Hanging out with you guys, other than you, Rick, was super fun. I think the events were pretty well done. We got some really good prospects for lenders as well. But I'd say what we did the most of was chat with potential strategic partners and vendors.
Let's see. What would you say to be the main themes of the MBA this year, Jeremy?
The phrase I kept coming back to was necessity is the mother of invention. So when things happen that require you to think outside the box or think differently about your business, new ideas, new partnerships, or new conversations might be on the table that weren't on the table just a year ago or 2 years ago or maybe ever. And so I really try to push that, not just because it benefits me and what I do in the innovation set, but also just in general, because there's I'll put it this way. What I heard a lot of was, what should I do for my business? What should MBA do for its members? What I wish I had heard more of is, what does the American homeowner need right now? What does the American renter need right now? What does the American home shopper need right now? Those are the questions that are going to unlock the thing that sets you apart in the next 36 months. Not like, how do we maneuver defensively, but rather, how do we flip the script and think about consumers?
So what, it's so hard with the MBA because they organize a lot of these, the speaker schedule, months in advance. So it's kind of hard for them to, set up a more dynamic schedule. But I do agree with you. I mean, it's a question of kind of industry status quo versus more of an innovative look forward around, where the industry is heading and what the industry needs, or ultimately what the consumer needs. And then ultimately what the mortgage lender needs, right? Because, obviously that's the audience, the immediate audience of the, the conference. What about you, Brian?
Yeah, I'll spend a few minutes just on the MBA itself, right? The Mortgage Bankers Association and kind of their organization of the event. It's obviously a great event every year. Arguably, attendance was probably down a little bit. It's tough to tell. It's such a spread out venue. The conference center itself was super spread out, and then you had the adjoining hotels were not adjoining at all. They're freaking blocks apart from each other. So it was really tough to get a read on who was all there. But one thing I'll credit the MBA for is I thought they were very candid and realistic in their view of the current market, but also what's coming down the immediate pipe, call it the next 6 to 12 months. Not a lot of candy coating, not a lot of rah, which is, I don't know that was necessary. I think we needed a dose of reality, and the candid, reports were real. In the day and a half that I've been back, I've had several conversations, people asking me about, was it gloom and doom? I don't think the vibe was gloom and doom. And I think part of the reason is the gloom and doomers don't go to the conferences. They sit back and piss and moan about life. So I think the people that make their way to these conferences, and the MBA in particular, they have a layer and a level of optimism. It's not rosy, it's real, but they're in this thing for the long haul. And so I left encouraged, but I also left knowing that, we're going to all be, working really hard through the winter, to get to the other side. I started hearing this theme of survive till 25. While I get it, I don't like it. I think it sets people up to give them a pass on the full year 24. I actually think, and this is the way I think about my business, like the next 75 days, I'm going to be grinding like I've never grinded before to set up January to be better than it could have been otherwise. So I'm hoping that the mindset isn't just to survive till 25, but to pound the rock as hard as you can right now to have some success in 24 and beyond.
Yeah, I agree. I think that was true of the vibe, Brian. I think you're exactly right. Like anybody, we always expand our networks when we're there, right? We meet new people, and that always happens. It happened this year. But I also think that there was a bit of a reunion feel for people who recognize that anybody there is there because their career and their livelihood is a part of this thing, and we're all in it together. And I think that was true of the people I talked to as well. I think it's a good call.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Jeremy. Being we're a newer company. I only joined NewsZip 6 or 7 months ago. I think they've been to one MBA before, but we're pretty new then. Yeah, we were treated with a lot of respect and seriousness by everyone. I think by the nature of being there. So that was cool to see. That's not always the case.
Your value prop is a bit different though. I would think that it's fairly timely given the market as far as capturing that relationship with the realtor. So I could see why, like, almost in more competitive markets, you guys the relevance of what you do becomes, greater to the lender.
No, I totally agree. Everyone's there trying to figure out how to get better at purchase and what new innovative stuff they can do, and those are kind of the two things they talk to us about. So I do think it was timely, but to Jeremy's point, I think everyone that was there gets a lot of credit from everyone else that's there.
My take on the NBA was pretty vibrant. I was actually surprised at look, I know how much it costs to exhibit and to show up at these conferences. And I was actually pretty surprised at the number of vendors and the number of how much money that was being invested, excuse me, in these, in the showcase. And there was a lot of new vendors. I either were new startups or that are relatively new tech players on the scene. And that's always good. It's like new fertilizer in the soil of the industry that kind of just, bakes this up for the next 10 to 15 years of growth. It'll be really interesting to see, how things shape out. Typically, like, one leading barometer of how well the industry is going and in the appetite for risk for vendors is sort of the open bar, the open bar, metric, because in this particular conference, like everyone had open bars, and it sounds silly, but it's real. I mean, that's a real thing because these vendors go into these parties and they are calculating what their return on investment is going to be at these conferences, and they're putting money into these events and these shows. And I thought the, parties were really effective. I went to a Snapdoc party, which I thought was really, really, well done and very classy. What was the other parties that you guys went to that I thought you guys thought were pretty productive?
I went to a bunch. I'm sure so did the other guys, but I went to two that were like, I was startled by how nice they were and how much they probably cost. So TransUnion had the big one at the Brian and I hung out there. Had a big one at the Ritz there in Philly, and they had hundreds of people with an open tab, and they had all their leadership there, and that was a really, really legitimate event that I was excited to be a part of. And then the other one that I thought was really cool and really well attended was Solidify. That was, I think it was the Four Seasons, but it was their like penthouse bar. That was really well attended, and I think I even got there late. And what else? We went to Total Expert. That was fun. That was really well attended.
Yeah. It did see Mark Byron said home diversification is disruptive and the industry needs disruption right now. For sure. I mean, especially in down markets, I think that is when you experience, the greatest disruption, right? Loan Depot started in 2010 and really didn't, it was a breakout star in 2015. And there was probably two down markets, 2010 and 2013, in between their rise to the top five, interestingly enough. So I think there's disruption both in technologies and as well as new lenders that emerge to, the top of the crest of who the legacy lenders are. And that kind of plays to your point, Jeremy, of home diversification. The question is like, what does the market need and what do consumers need in this market, and whether or not the NBA missed the mark in maybe addressing that. I think in defense of the NBA, let's just say this, Jeremy, there's so many fires to fight right now. It's hard to think forward, right? There's so many fires of like rates, buyback, issues with respect to the risk retention for lenders, that the questions of like whether or not you can think 2 or 3 moves ahead on the chessboard is a whole separate sort of phase of the market and phase of thinking, don't you think?
Yeah, I think we're talking about two slightly different areas of overlap here. Like, I don't think that the conference agenda was the thing that I was talking about. Like, I think that the NBA does a good job of convening and agenda setting for the conversations and the meetups and everyone being there. And I think that was accomplished, definitely, to Brian's point about what the expectations are going in and how much work you can get done in 2.5 days. I still am I haven't been in a ton of industries in my career, but I will tell you, we get a lot of work done in a short amount of time at these things. And everyone I talk to is in the same boat. They're all getting as much as they possibly can done. There is not a ton of downtime. We don't sleep a lot. And in large part, it is due to these conversations. So I think like the convening, the agenda setting is good. So I wasn't necessarily saying I was missing out on a track at the agenda, at the NBA, because I don't know that it could have gotten well attended given how we approach these things, which is to try to see everybody that we want to see and have the conversations we want to see. I guess what I was more saying was whether you have a defensive mindset or an offensive mindset. And I think there were a lot of people with a defensive mindset, and that's fine. It's just a mindset thing. It's how you approach your strategy. The second thing I would say is to your comment about the investment. I was pleasantly surprised. There is more patient investment in our industry than I would have anticipated. Patient investment meaning, and preaching to the choir a little bit with Brian and what Finlauder's doing, but like investors willing to say, this is going to take a long time. These are multi-year sales cycles with really entrenched incumbents, right? So when you think about the ecosystem you're describing, Rick, who's spending money, who's growing, who has a mindset of growth and prosperity, who's inviting other people to the table, who are the new voices in the new, I think you called it blood or DNA or whatever, kind of seeding the soil, like to mix about 7 metaphors there. That I think I was pleasantly surprised as well. I think there's good pressure, healthy pressure coming from companies saying like, this isn't the way to do it, or do it this way, or this is how you use data. And to see that, the exhibit floor wasn't as big as it's been in years past, but I think it was a little bit more diverse than people were expecting.
Yeah. Brian, how do you do that? I mean, you guys have raised a lot of capital and you guys have done pretty well at FinLocker to kind of carve a path forward. But how do you do that? Like because a lot of investors aren't patient. Like the capital is not patient at all, right? And we know fintech investments have collapsed in the last 16, 18 months. Like how do you set expectations? And I know this is sort of off script or off some of the talking points that we discussed prior, but it's a tricky dance to really set expectations with investors and say, look, this is not a quick turnaround. This is a longer term play. And with the right strategic moves in the interim, it's going to be okay. But you have to be, it's kind of like you're going to burn before you grow.
Yeah.
Like how do you, what has that process been like on your end?
It's painful. I had jet black hair when we started the process.
Did we lose Brock?
He's on the phone.
He's
taking another call.
I might just remove him.
He's doing a follow-up from me.
When he's back on, I'll add him to the stage. Go ahead.
So what I would say, Rick, is that we've been fortunate to have very strategic investment partners who are right alongside us in that journey. So, they understood coming in kind of the timeline and horizon. Now, I'll say this: none of us expected to wake up on Friday, whatever today is, the 20th, with staring at an 8% 30-year fixed note rate. So, but be that as it may, we've done a little bit more on the investor side with strategics that are helping us in the business. And so I think in that regard, they tend to have a longer view. They tend to be more patient. We do have some, VC private equity partners. We also have founders that really believe in the business, really believe in the platform, are still very much supportive of the industry that we serve, and that's helpful as well.
Credit to you guys, because you guys have, I think, you've done a really good job. Excuse me, in both maintaining your sort of market presence, your visibility, and your relevance in more of a challenging time. But I would say that the whole concept of client incubation is the whole, you almost have to create your own customer in today's market.
Yes.
Versus just wait for the customer to come to you, right?
Yeah.
So I think your technology is extremely timely, and it's worth the wait. I mean, the investors are smart to ensure that that there's probably no better time to invest in client incubation than right now, because it's what every lender needs.
Yeah, I mean, if we go back just 18 months, our target clients had more business than they could handle. They didn't have the capacity for it. And so the last thing they were thinking about, right, wrong, or indifferent, was client incubation, because they were just, treading water to keep up with the volume they had. So today we're in a completely different environment. Going back to the disruption for a minute, we talk a lot about disruptive technologies, disruptive companies, disruptive products. I would argue and call out that, and I'm super excited about this, there's disruption happening at the street level with loan officers who I'd rather call mortgage advisors. And the disruption is through social media, right? You've got these financial influencers, these finfluencers that are using their personal network and building a personal brand and building their own followers. And that's becoming, I think that's an up and coming disruption to the bigger players. We're starting to see where some of the biggest lenders who've traditionally been more centralized are actively recruiting local loan officers in local markets. And so I would be remiss to not call out and recognize those kind of next generation loan officers, mortgage advisors, who I think are doing a great job being disruptive at a local scale.
Great point, Brian. I hate giving Rick credit for anything, but I do have to give him credit for this. When we were first starting to work together, and I was really deep diving behavioral economics for a while. One of the things Rick said to me that's always stuck with me is we make decisions emotionally and we rationalize them with data after. And that's true, I think, of consumers and business people, candidly. We love making decisions that way. We're human. And even if the rationalization or the data is a fraction of a second later in our mind, we've made the decision emotionally. It's one of the reasons I'm so bullish on storytelling all the time, to the point that it probably annoys people. But the reality is, I think that the emotional connection and the brand that folks like you're talking about are making with people will actually make a difference. And I think nice. I think for a long time, the belief, especially of early digital lenders, early adopters, Rocket, others, was that you can't really trust a lead a year out, or you can't trust a lead 2 years out, because you're going to invest in it and you're going to lose it. And that investment will go away and it's too risky. It's a rational decision. I get it. Yeah. But I think what you're seeing is a really healthy trend to saying, like, I don't believe that, and I'm willing to put my personal brand at stake to make sure that I win that lead through all that process. And then we're seeing people build tools to actually make that more possible, right? If you automate nurturing, all of a sudden you're building your brand, you're automating the hard, longer, more expensive things, and you're applying like really a macro technology mindset to that micro relationship. I think that's a great point that you made.
One of the things you mentioned, Brian, was that, the idea of in today's market, really going on the offensive. And I don't know if it was you who said this, but somebody else had said that like cross country is always sort of on the offensive. And, certainly given my relationship with cross country, I mean, it's an amazing company. But one thing, even from an outside in looking at a company like cross country, I say to myself, like, it really is an aggressive company,
Yeah.
and you just look at sort of the growth trend of the organization. Going into COVID in 2020, cross country wasn't even in the top 20.
Right.
It wasn't until really 2021 that it made, I think, the 19th largest lender, and then went from 2021 to 2023 to being the largest retail lender in the country. In one of the things that our head of brand strategy, who's really incredible, she said that her name's Laura Suave, and she's like, Rick, we're always on the offense. We always want to win, and we always want to be on the offense, which really is pretty astonishing in an environment where there is a circle of the wagons kind of mentality because of real capital constraints that are confronting mortgage companies, and real market, fears, right? But you need to have sort of the leadership, the capital, and sort of the aggressive sort of process to go out there and to sort of grow on a very horizontal basis. Anyway, so the offensive strategy, I think, is an interesting one that, comment that you made earlier.
I've long been a fan of cross country, and I love Ron's approach. He gets it and he gets into it, right? He's in the business, and that aggressive offensive strategy and nature definitely comes from the top.
It is amazing. He's such a reluctant leader. He's such a quiet leader in some ways. He's the guy that doesn't really want to be on sort of the front lines or on the spotlight. He just wants to win. And I've seen it firsthand, and it's pretty fascinating. But I think
just to be clear, when is volume of mortgages annually? That's what winning is.
Market share. It's number one. It's market share. Yeah. I mean, one of the comments that one of the executives made to me, maybe 8 or 10 months ago was like, look, Rick, we want to be number one in origination volume. And I'm like, number one's a lot. Like when you look at UWM or you look at Rocket, that's kind of a lot, because there's a big step down from 2 to number 3 to number 4, like 3 to like 5 and 6 are pretty much, are a little bit of a step function, and then it really drops down. And when you get to, the 10th largest or so company in the country, and I can even look it up. When you get to, and I can even tell you right now who the 10th largest company is, it's like you're in the single digit billions, so it really steps down quite a bit. Like right now, the 10th largest is Loan Depot at 16 billion, right? And cross country right now is at 23 billion, the largest retail company in the country. Fairway's right behind it at 21.6. But it really drops off pretty hard and fast. When you get to number 12 is 14 billion.
What if consolidation continues in a couple of those top 10, top 5?
We didn't hear those two names together at all this week.
Yeah,
there wasn't anything
that was
last week about.
That was an MBA. That for me obviously was dominant because people ask me a lot about the cross country sort of Fairway acquisition, if you will. And I don't run retail, so I have no comments on it per se. But my challenge and what sort of makes me sad about that to some degree, I've done a lot of acquisitions in the business over the last 10 years. I've helped companies acquire probably 4 or 5 billion worth of production. And the challenge is when things like that get out, right? The challenge is it really becomes a feeding frenzy from a recruiting standpoint.
Yeah.
It really ends up diminishing, makes valuation so much more difficult because so much of the value of the purchase becomes on a future forecast based on the production that retains or that stays within the organization. So it makes negotiating the deal so much more difficult. There's no, I can't, I'm not going to confirm nor deny. I mean, I'm not going to sort of comment even on any conversations that probably didn't even occur between Fairway and Cross Country. Fairway is a great company. I have a tremendous amount of respect for the organization. Jacobson has been really a leading thought leader in the business. I mean, there's been no probably greater consistent, high integrity leader from a production standpoint than the Fairway leadership team. You know, I think they've made a number of sort of miscalculations, but I mean, everyone makes mistakes in this business with wholesale and retail and the different mixes of their business. But I have a lot of respect for what they're doing.
I think your point about market share and goals and being proactive is a key one here, right? Because I was obviously having a lot of the similar conversations we were all having around those rumors. What do you think? Would you hear that kind of thing? But my view was that you have to be number 2 before you get to be number 1. You have to be there on the way to number 1. We've all seen it. Like when I joined Quicken Loans, it was number 2 to the Stagecoach, right? And that was the goal. We're number 2. We want to be number 1. And I think that that type of ambition to say, how am I going to get there? There's only a few ways, right? So consolidation or acquisition is one of those ways, right? So yeah. My point is this, like, there's a lot more you can do when you become number 2 that maybe is harder when your numbers 3 and 4 come together or whatever. So I was just looking at it as a pure path to the goal that you mentioned.
Yeah, look, there's going to be a tremendous amount of consolidation. I mean, in my conversations in that $500 million to about $1.5 billion, which is a lot of mortgage companies.
Yeah.
There's going to be about probably 25-30% attrition, either through companies that are acquiring other companies or companies that just go out of business because they just simply don't have the liquidity. And there's just no buyers for them, or they want too much money for their company or whatever the case may be. I think that's where you're going to see, you know, for the most part, the enterprise companies are pretty good. Their servicing portfolios are keeping them pretty stable. And you can weather the losses on the retail side. It's really the small to mid-sized enterprises that are going to be real challenges. I call it sort of the collapse of the middle-class mortgage banker.
Yeah.
Where that middle-class mortgage banker simply is evaporating, and they're either sort of getting acquired, closing down, or even on the smaller end becoming brokers. And then you have the enterprise lenders really growing. American Pacific Mortgage is a good example of that. They've catapulted probably from 36th, 38th in from 2022, 23 to a top 25 player. Just in the last they're right now 6.6 billion at 20. They're number 23 right now in the United States for total origination at 6.6 billion. So that's actually the drop off. Remember that kind of that ocean kind of depth where it all sort of it drops off that I was referring to earlier. Loan Depot is at 16 billion at number 10, but as you start sort of going down the charts, you have Guild at number 16 at 11 billion, New American Funding at 7 billion at number 20. But then you have American Pacific at 6 billion at number 23. It's fascinating to see, because 6 billion isn't really a lot of production when you look at it. In today's market, it's a lot, but in 2019, 2020, that wouldn't have gotten you near the top 25. 6 billion.
Yeah, and if you think about the infrastructure that you have to be a $6 billion originator, seller, servicer, or a $2 billion originator, seller, servicer, that's where the cliff is. And are you better as a $2 billion being combined with another $2 billion entity and getting economies of scale across some of those shared services? I mean, those are all the conversations that I think are happening right now, is how do we combine forces, and take the best of what each platform brings and at least get to a place where you can scale your fixed costs in a way across that volume that makes sense.
Yeah, Brian, that's a good point. It'd be really curious to see how this plays out from a technology backbone perspective, because we've done a really poor job over the last 10 years, implementing new technology in a way that allows those companies to work together. Because you're right. There are companies that we all know and work with that together would make a really special company at that level you just described. But because one has 72 vendors and one has 64 vendors and only 12 are in common, it's like virtually impossible to imagine what that integration would look like. And so that, I don't know how that changes. I'm not here to tell you that. I wish I was, but I think it was a part of a lot of conversations I did have in Philly, to be honest, which was how are we going to solve this so that it doesn't keep happening? Because we did have, as much as we had disruptors and cool new participants in the industry, we also had a bunch of folks solving for one tiny little thing still. And when you do that, it's helpful and actually interesting, but it further fragments the ability for a lender to consolidate services or share services.
Can you give an example, Jeremy, of kind of a niche solutions provider?
I have a fun one for you. So we met with multiple CRM companies because NewZip integrates with at the CRM level with a lot of our partners. Sometimes above that to marketing platforms, but pretty much always at the CRM level. We've integrated with about 12 different, it's 11 or 12 now, different CRMs for 20 lender partners. So that's just kind of an eye-popping number to me. And we met with 3 or 4 new ones that we're going to be integrating with for some of our next partners. So we're going to be at, every new partner, there's about a 70% chance they're on a new CRM right now, which is, not very hard for us because to Jeremy's point, we kind of built the whole thing for interoperability. So it's, hours of work, not weeks, but it's still kind of mind blowing. And I've seen companies where it takes years to change CRMs or at least months to change CRMs. And so that's one. I also saw a bunch of new POS companies, LOS companies, supposedly all-in-one companies. So not even critiquing any of the individual companies, just some of it's very crowded and very diverse.
What was that one LOS company that's led by that young guy? What was that company called?
Are you talking about Mike at Vesta?
Yeah. At Vesta,
Mike, I'm laughing just because I think Vesta's great and I think Mike's great, but I'm often curious how Vesta is viewed from those that don't know Mike as well as I do. So I guess like that young guy at that new LOS is probably about the thing. But
I don't know him from Adam. I mean, he could be a Stanford PhD.
I get it.
I know. I mean, I have no idea who he is. I just, look, coming from the LOS ranks myself with, I ran Calyx for 2.5 years and then consulted with Ellie Mae for 2.5, 3 years. It's such a brutal market. It's such a bloodbath kind of a market. I remember when Scott Cooley created the website technologygraveyard.com and he categorized all the different innovative tech startups in the 2000s that just were a littered graveyard of mortgage companies. And it's a really, really difficult space to penetrate. I mean, I can't even estimate that. I wish them luck. I mean, I think it's ripe for disruption, and it's probably going to be a certain point in time when that happens. I don't know when that is, but
just to have a conversation together for a quick second. He was actually who I was referring to. Believe it or not, that's who I was referring to when I said patient capital, because he came from his early career was at Blend, and he understands what he's doing. Meaning, Vesta said, this is going to take us 20 years. This is going to take us our careers. Like, they've decided that. They know that. They have investors who get it. So that's the level of commitment it requires to break through some of what you're talking about. So that's all I mean, is like, you really have to be aware and comfortable with what you're taking on.
No, that's amazing. Let's shift gears a little bit. What do you guys think about the 8% rate? Like, we're now there, right? I mean, these guys, we all saw the Housing Wire article this morning that they kind of sent out that I thought it was a really good article. Basically just saying that, mortgage rates are at their 20-year high, and then homeowners are, hesitant to list their properties, which is the chief economist at realtor.com. How long are we there for, and what does the future look like with that?
Yeah, I think that's the fact that we're there is probably not terribly surprising given the most recent events globally and certainly what's going on in the economy here. But I think the big question is, how long do we stay in a, you know, a 7.25 to 8.25 kind of range? Because I mean that the longer that happens, the colder this winter becomes, right?
Yeah, and with how slow Q4 always is, I was kind of worried that even if rates went down a little bit, we weren't really going to see any movement. So now we're seeing kind of the opposite. So I mean, I've been telling everyone not to expect much relief this year. Obviously, I know that doesn't shock anyone on here. I month by month, we're definitely going to be getting a lot worse through the beginning of the year. Just having looked at the data so many times, as I know you guys all have. In terms of the actual rates, I mean, hard to say. It's interesting to see how many people are calling, you know, from NAR to all kinds of different stakeholders calling for the Fed to not kill the housing industry and things like that in the last few days. I think that's right. I think that's good.
Yeah.
But it's interesting.
Look, we haven't really had national leadership that, from a political perspective, that has really driven anything new or different, right? So my view is going to annoy everybody, but it's basically like the longer this lasts, the more it's going to drive shakeups that people didn't intend for housing shakeups to influence, remote work being the number one. Like the CEOs are already asking, what am I supposed to do with remote work? How am I supposed to manage consumer expectations, talent expectations, retention with what I need to do for productivity and delivery? Because rents are not going down either. So people aren't sitting there feeling more comfortable renting. They're feeling the heat the same way. So it's like, okay, I can't rent anymore. I can't own now, or at least that's the perception. So what am I going to do? I think it's going to create an unlikely scenario. I think people are going to start moving and doing different things that policymakers and economists didn't expect, because it's just going to feel like I can't stay and I can't own. So I got to do something. I have to do something else. And I think it's going to create some unlikely behavior. And that's might be good. It might be bad, but it's my sense of what might happen the longer this lasts.
You know, I think this is going to serve the benefits of two things. One is I think it's going to serve the benefit of what you're doing, Brock, because, you know, at a higher rate environment, every deal that can get closed is the most important. It becomes increasingly important. So that relationship that the lender and the realtor has becomes increasingly more difficult and more important to sort of maintain and not get unhinged and get reassigned to another lender. And then with FinLocker, look, the idea of incubating, like kind of, I call it wrenching the rag, where there's a market out there. There's a lot of buyers out there that are like, I think the average credit score of the average consumer is like 650. But the reality is, which means there's a hell of a lot of consumers that are below 650, right? That need improvement. And then there's a lot of consumers at 650 to be able to qualify for that right monthly payment and then monthly loan amount. They're going to need a better interest rate on that, and they're going to need a better credit, score. So they're going to need to go from a 650 to a 675 or a 700, and to be able to incubate that client and have a tool to be able to bring awareness around doing that and to help them to do that is going to be important to companies like FinLocker or others to be able to sort of work with that lender to really incubate the client, because the sales cycle per consumer is going to be a lot longer. I mean, wouldn't you agree with that?
Oh yeah. Jeremy and I, well, I know Brian and I've talked about it too, but Jeremy and I were on a panel at the New England MBA a couple of weeks ago. And one of the main things we talked about is that the cost of leads is going down and everyone's stopping buying leads, and, you know, leads are worthless right now, and all this kind of conversation going on. But really, I mean, my view is just that everyone's on hold right now, and the leads as valuable as they ever were, if you can zoom out far enough, right? They're still going to be that lead is going to be a home buyer or whether it's a refi lead or whatever. That lead is going to be a mortgage someday. It's just not in 3 months. It might be 9 months, maybe 18 months. We have by far record on hold numbers, and I'm sure Brian's filling up a lot of lockers.
Yeah, that was Brock. That was a tee up for Brian. But go ahead, Brian.
No, isn't it?
Jesus Christ, man.
He's a young, aggressive guy. Let him have his time. It's all right. Now, you're spot on, Brock, and I think there's not a lot, but there's a handful of folks that are thinking really long-term and strategic. And because those leads are so cheap right now, I'm seeing some people they're loading the boat right now because they have systems in place that they're confident will, get them to a place where the conversion on those leads might be 12, 18 months down the road will be enough to get to reap a really solid ROI. And yeah, FinLocker is one of those tools in the toolkit that lenders could and should think about. I think of it a little bit differently. I talk to so many different lenders and loan originators every day, and the reality of it is our product's not for everybody. If you don't have the mindset to, there's still people that are very transactionally focused, and I can't solve for that. And so, you have to have a mindset that getting up the funnel, getting engaged early is a strategy that will prevail. And I'm here in Detroit. Jeremy, you're a lot closer to these guys than I am from a geography perspective, but I always look at what Rocket's doing, and that's, they kind of show the playbook for the rest of the industry. Most of the industry can't really figure it out, and by the time they do, Rocket's on to the next thing. And I think I go back to their acquisition of Truebill. I don't think the acquisition of Truebill was to have a cool technology that helps people, cancel a $7.99 Netflix account for $7.99 a month subscription to pay for Truebill. It was all about, customer acquisition up the funnel with a 2+ year horizon for any kind of real monetization. So, the playbook's been out there. I think lenders are the lenders that are in this for the long haul are starting to kind of understand that. And I firmly believe, especially in this type of market, that's obviously very purchase oriented, having that local trusted real estate or mortgage professional with the right technology is a winning strategy.
I agree.
Thank
like
you, Brian.
that. Yeah, I like that, Brian.
Yeah.
Well, good. Well, I think that pretty much concludes what we wanted to talk about. Any sort of concluding comments from anyone, minus Brock? What do you think, Brock? Brock, you can have the last say.
No, I'm good.
Turning into a pumpkin. All right.
Exactly.
What was cool was being able to spend Brock's birthday with him. That was cool. So
that's
that was awesome.
Yeah, thanks, Brian.
Indeed.
No, that was awesome. Well, good.
Have a great weekend.
Brian, thanks. Yeah, Brian, thanks for joining us. This was awesome. I really appreciate you guys. The conversation was lively as ever, so I appreciate it. We'll talk to you guys soon.
See y'all.